Thank you, Sherry. I'm, I guess, the representative here for the Historical Society. We acquired this museum from the diocese around the year 2000. Since that time, most of the parishioners that belong to this parish have passed on. But we still run as a nonprofit here, and we do keep the lights on, so we're pretty happy about that. We will be open here now. I'm a director here with the society, and we'll be opening now in May, and we'll run through September. We try to be open each weekend, maybe from 10 to 3, 10 to 2, something, depending on the volunteers. Sometimes on Fridays, it all depends, you gotta check. Wednesday mornings during the year, we are usually open from 9 to 11. The ladies come in here and they do some work and clean up and try to rearrange the displays and keep everything going. I was asked to do a program here today, and the good thing is they never told me what I had to talk about. I just could. So the first thing that came to my mind, I said, was something that was important. There is nothing worse than going out there and catching their biggest lunker in the lake, and here you lose them because your green bopper or yellow lily popper came off because of a bad knot in a nylon line. So I thought, well, this will be a great topic. Everybody's into this. And my wife kind of looked at me and she says, you know, I know for a fact that a few ladies don't go fly fishing. And she said, maybe you better pick a different topic. So then we decided, I said, well, being this is a historical society, we have the information. We're going to talk about some of the early churches here in western Wisconsin. We've got the resources here. We've got the Historical Society from Trempealeau County, Buffalo County. I said we have Old Main in Galesville, which I said have many, many pictures on hand. And I said we have online, there's all these books are online. There's a book, it's the Norwegian Lutheran Congregation of America. I said, I use that book. There's a lot of pictures in these things, and I said that, and it shows the early settlers and the development of our county. I used History of Trempealeau County, written in 1917, History of Northern Wisconsin, 1981. This Norwegian book here, which has pictures of all these churches. I did not realize the can of worms I was opening when I opened this up. I says, you drive through a town, you see a few churches in town, and that's kind of the extent of it. But you don't realize the history behind it. The first, let's say, effort to bring a European religion into the area, there was a mission set up in Parole Park in 1837. And the idea was to bring the Bible and to teach the Native Americans how to be farmers. Well, they were not interested in either idea. So within 2 years, that mission collapsed. It failed. In 1845, they opened a second mission in Winona, and that one did succeed. It was first established, I guess, what we say, religion in the area that we started. There was a guy named David Wing. He settled in Caledonia, about where McGilvery's Ferry is. There was going to be a little town developed there, and he was a clergyman for a Methodist congregation. And as payment, he had a farm. Now, how he developed or whatever happened, I could not find anything on that church, but maybe when the ferry closed, that was kind of the end of the development. I've done some videos with White Owl TV here, and we did one on McGilvery Ferry, we did a few on Lyle's Landing, and a few other miscellaneous things, so I got my foot in the door on some of this information ahead of time. And the early communities, I said, as soon as the settlers got here, no matter what nationality or denomination they were, the first thing came to their mind after they got a roof over their own head is we got to have a church. And it was every third, fourth farmer, that should be a church put up here. They were determined we got to have a church as close as we can have it handy. Well, there was no ministry to administer these churches. You had a traveling minister come by once in a while. Some of these parishes, Trempealeau, for example, their first churches, St. Mary's out of La Crosse came up, and twice a year, whether they needed it or not, somebody came up there. You know, so I mean, it was whoever came by. So most of the the religious ceremonies and stuff were in the home itself or in the early homes. And when they could, they did build a church. They started out and they built a church of some type, and everybody started congregating. The first church, I guess, I said we did a video here on Whistle Pass in Pine Creek. And this is about the first church that I could kind of start in our general area. It's not the oldest church. But in the first church, there was a church set up on Roy Hesley Farm. Randy Hesley owns it now. It's in Whistle Pass. And there's a little building there in the corner. This is a 1938 picture. And at the bottom of that picture there, right there, that's the church. And they added it after a while. They changed it to a corn crib. But from 1860 to 1870, there were masses in this church. Now, which denomination they were, I do not know. There was no cemetery that we could tell associated with it. But we suspect that if at that time, being there was no minister, you ain't going to keep somebody around for 2 weeks if something happens. So they probably were buried on their own property. That's speculation, but that's where we're going to go with, and there's nobody's going to argue. The first church we come up with in Pine Creek, I said, was built on top of the hill where the red square is up there. Pine Creek Church was started in 1862. The denomination, they got together. It didn't take long. That church burnt down. They rebuilt the second church. Same place. That one served the community until 1875. They finally just outgrew it. Just, population expanded. And they built the church over here. This church here still stands today. I said the second church was moved. It became a farm building. And it was used until probably within the last 20 years, and it finally was burnt down, the log church. It finally burned down. It got so rat infested because of the hollow logs already and whatever else. So I said it finally was burnt down. But in 1875, they built a present church that still stands there in Pine Creek. It had no basement. I got some notes here someplace. I remember it costed $10,600 to build, which is about $280,000 nowadays. And out of there, I said there was about 19 ladies have joined the sisterhood. We've had a couple missionaries join the brotherhood, and there's been 2 priests have come out of Pine Creek. Pine Creek was a parent church for North Creek. We ain't going to get into this Kashubians and Silesian thing here because there'll be fists flying. But anyhow, I said the Polish people that came to North Creek, they established their church here. They were a mission of Pine Creek. And they got it going. And as Anton Sabota donated the land, and unfortunately, hauling lumber to build his church, he got killed. It was a parent church for independence, which is kind of hard to believe, but it was who had the fastest carpenters would have kind of boiled down to. We even had dedication. When they dedicated North Creek, they beat Independence by 1 day. So Independence became the mission church of North Creek. But I said the first churches, like usual, were in a home. This was on Clarence Sabota's farm out there, and it was from Pelgi and what was it? Joe. I can't quite see my chart here, but that's all right. Stanahowski farm. And I said, North Creek has come up. They've had 2 priests. They've had a few ladies go to the sisterhood. And this is a picture of the first church set up here. And this is the priest's house, the church, and the school over here on the end. This little building, I don't think that's a smokehouse either, but there's a little building there too. But anyhow, the church itself was facing 180 degrees from the way it faces now. It doesn't face the road, it's faced the other way. But after it burnt down, then it was changed around. St. Michael started in 1875, and it's still used today just for special occasions and funerals and things. It hasn't been unconsecrated. This church, the relics have been removed from this church. And here's the other picture I found of North Creek out there. I said, these trees here appear to be cottonwood, and that would make sense because when the first settlers came, there weren't very many trees here. It was mostly prairie. So cottonwood would grow fast, lowlands along the creeks, yeah, it would be a cottonwood. Independence, St. Peter and Paul, established 1875. 6 ministers to the priesthood, 10 to something or whatever else there. You can maybe see better than I can. I guess if I look at my charts here, I'd probably have it. Well, it costed them $25,000 in 1875 to build this church, which was just shy of $1 million nowadays. So the people in Independence, I said, you go there even now for Christmas, the decorations and stuff, the work that's done in that town, I said, you're really impressed with the small population they have and how well that community has developed. But I said, the bells were donated by Jacob and Peter Kulig, and they had 6 men to the priesthood there, and 1 went to the Maryknook Brotherhood down here, and there's 46 ladies have joined the sisterhood out of this parish alone. St. Stan's. When North Creek was developed, I said it was a thriving parish. It still was until the time it was decommissioned here or slowed down. But there was a school fire in 1910, 1911, whatever it was here, 1910. And half of the parishioners said, maybe we shouldn't build a school, maybe we should move to Arcadia where there is a school and build our own church. And it ended up, it split North Creek. And North Creek ended up, I said, the people that stayed, they were bound and determined their church is going to be developed and it's going to grow. And Holy Family on top of the hill, which was St. Stan's at the time, was split off of North Creek. And they had a brick building and was a nice structure. Got hit by lightning, and in 1942, thing burned down. A picture of the church itself and interior. And it burnt down, and they had church then in the in the armories downtown. I'm not sure if it was the new armory or the old armory. The new armory, across from the theater. The old armory stood down where the old bank was, but it was in the armory, they had it downtown. And I said, I got these pictures, a few pictures here from Joan of the dedication here. They set the stone, and the bishop came down, and he blessed the church and the surroundings. Whoops, one faster than I can talk. And they completed the thing in 1948, but they had masses on nice days on top of the floor, and on bad days in the basement, once it was sealed, that they could have mass in the church. So they could start using the church, and it's developed into what it is here today. The oldest church we have in our community is Immaculate Conception from Fountain City. When Thomas Holmes was in there, and when they showed up there, when Weber showed up to talk to Thomas, he said, I've already been here 15 years. So, I mean, and he was one of those guys, if he could see a neighbor, we're getting too close, I got to move. So Thomas Holmes did move away from Fountain City. And I believe he ended up, I think he died down in Alabama or Georgia or something like that. But he went out west after got crowded, 2-3 neighbors there. The original name for Fountain City was Wamedy. But they said, no, the ladies of the town said, no, it was too hard to spell, and they didn't like it. And it ended up, it did get changed to Fountain City. The church was built in 56, and it costed only $4,000. That wasn't a bad church, but that's still $160,000 nowadays. It's the oldest congregation Catholic congregation in Buffalo County. There was a Lutheran church built there in 1860 for $2,500, and there was a Methodist also church built. That's one thing I said when I started looking. I think I skipped over that slide, or didn't mention it. When I started doing the research on this, only 20% of the people were Catholic in this area in the early years. 70% were Norwegian and Lutherans, and 10% were miscellaneous. So I said, we'll come up with an awful lot of Lutheran churches here toward the end of this, and we're going to go through them kind of fast because I don't want people sleeping. I've seen that happen in church too many times, but we want to try to keep moving here and get going through here. But Fountain City was a parent church for St. Anne's out of Buffalo City, St. Lawrence out of Alma, St. Boniface out of Wamedy, and St. Joe's out of Glencoe. Because I said it was the first church that we had set up. St. Anne's was a little church that, there's an interior and a present day thing over here. St. Anne's was a small wooden structure that was set up there. It was a little German church, and they raised it for $1,200 in 1868. And it closed in, I can't see the number, but 19-something there, or whatever it was. I can't see it. It looks like there's a wave in my thing here. But anyhow, I said, most of these churches were serviced by traveling ministers because there wasn't really many parish priests around that time. Later, it was serviced by Fountain City priests, and they would come on special occasions, whatever day they needed, or whenever it was prearranged. St. Lawrence, another one here. Elma was named after a little town in Russia. The guy that kind of named it, he said, it's well one, and he said, it's easy to spell. That was the biggest deal for naming Elma. And the riverboats, it's called the 12-mile bluff, because there was a huge pillar that stood just, I believe, on the south end of Elma. You could see it from the river. And it went down in 1882 or 84, something like that. In the 1880s, it collapsed. But everybody was scared. Don't build by that hill, because one of these days it's coming down. The priest in Fountain City, I said, will always service that church there for many years until they finally got their own parish. St. Lawrence over there, I said, another picture of the church now, the interior here and everything else has been done in the present day. The older churches, there was a lot of money spent remodeling and fixing and painting. The patience these people had is just unreal. I said, the artwork that they could do. This church was painted really well. Every one was done well. St. Boniface set up another one of those churches, I said, where you look at these books you look at. Here it says Henry Miller was the first settler there. Another book said it was a Kinchy, and another one said it was a guy named Roberts. So it all depends which book you're looking at. So don't bet the farm on anything we ever say, because it all depends who you're looking at. But I said there were a number of individuals that helped to develop these churches and get them all going. And Fountain City became the parent church, and Wamedy here became the parent church of St. Peter and Paul. St. Peter and Paul is on top of the hill there, where they have Lavender Lily Cemetery and whatever else up on the hill up there. But it was Mass was only 3 times a month, because the fourth day it had to go to the mission, and the church was rebuilt after the fire in 1915, 1916. One of us got on the wrong pages here, and he's just confused, but I'm not going to mention any names. 2 pages stuck together here. Now I can see. Now we're talking again here. Okay. And they acquired their first priest in 1867. The present church built 1877. 3 times a month, and up in Tyson Ridge. And the gentleman we got to say a few words about is Father Hodnick here. Ripley Hall now just been added in the last few years. You can see on the far picture over here. Father Hodnick was a POW in World War II. He's buried in Abbotsford, Wisconsin. That's up between Chippewa and Wausau up over here. And he said that he was a native of Yugoslavia. And he was, like I said, a POW there. And he said the Germans would come. He said they killed 20 Frenchmen. He said every time a German general or marshal got killed. So he said then he had sometimes rationed out the food for the prisoners. He said seldom got any meat. And he had quite an ordeal, but he was a well-liked priest up here in Wamedy. And he helped develop the community into what we're looking at here today. St. Peter and Paul, a little mission church. This was on top of Tyson Ridge. Go up double X or X out of Independence, and you're at the top of the hill. They make a right, and there's just a little store, a little town up in there. This church was there. Somebody supplied me with some pictures of it. There's the interior of the church and what it looks like, but I really question that red brick building, because that building doesn't look like this building. It could have been rebuilt. I couldn't find any information, but even the gravestones look funny. But you never say never. It's questionable. In St. Joe's, this is going to be the longest probably church we'll have to talk about. St. Joe's was a little thriving community just across the river by St. Joe's Cemetery. And they built their first church down by the river. And all the people from Myers Valley would cross the river to go to church over by Rebels and by Galeasons on the other side of the river. And it didn't take long. They had outgrown that church, so they rebuilt the new church up where the cemetery is. And after they got organized there a little while, the people here in Calvary Cemetery, let's say in that area, in Myers Valley, they all decided that, well, it's kind of a pain to keep crossing the river here. Sometimes the water's high, sometimes it's not, and we can't always get there when we want to be there. So they decided they're going to petition the diocese to try to build their own church. That time the diocese was in Milwaukee, it wasn't in La Crosse. Trempealeau County was only established in 1854, and Buffalo County 1853, so the diocese still was down south. And anyhow, the diocese gave them permission. They built a church, named it St. Peter and Paul. They were popular people, and it was in Calvary Cemetery. And the farmers all went there, and they were really happy they had their own little church. Well, they were technically just a mission church of St. Joe's. And the priests from Fountain City would come over and they'd do service there. We had ministers would come over there. And it got to the point where modernization kind of set in. And here Arcadia started expanding. And the church we were standing in got going. And Father decided, and here's another few pictures here of St. Joe's. There's a little bit pieces peeled off and had color photograph, but it was taken down, I believe, in 1949. But anyhow, I said, they got started out here, and Father said, being that we have automobiles now and it's not so hard and strenuous, the farmers can come to town. So they built the church here. And St. Peter and Paul, the first church we had in Arcadia, this was the original church here that they built. It stood out right out here in the line here. Here the here the rectory built in 1909. This present church built in 1902. The St. Peter and Paul Church, which was 1885. That's when they closed Calvary Church and moved over here. And here's the school built in 1889. St. Aloysius, we took that down. The interior of the church, you can see, I said how it was all decorated up like all the rest of the communities, churches are here. The school over here, you can't see it. It stood behind the present. This is the 1918 school. Behind it stood this other school, which is, I'll back up one or two pictures. That one right there, with the bell tower. You can see there was an addition stuck off to the west, and they're having some kind of I don't know if it's tree planting day or whatever it is, Armature Day, whatever it is. They're celebrating something there. St. Bridget's had a small problem because Ettrick, Gilsville, and Trempealeau had the lowest number of Catholic parishioners. So they ended up that Ettrick ended up being the parent church, and then they would have Mass in the other areas. They took care of Roaring Creek, which I had to look up. I never heard of this community. So between Melrose and Black River along there. It took care of Galesville and Trempealeau, and it was the first Irish church in the community. And they went back and forth there a few times, figuring where the priest should be and who should be where. But I said the new church was built in 1917, I believe it says there, because there was some competition there from Galesville, because Galesville had built a new church. So the mission, the father moved from Ettrick to Galesville, and then we're going to have Ettrick be a mission, and then they didn't like that, so they built a new parsonage, and then the father moved back again, and then it ended up that Galesville took care of Trempealeau, and St. Bridget's took care of Roaring Creek and that area up in there. St. Mary's got established in 1952, and like I said, it was a new church, and it was made the missions swap back and forth, but with no parsonage, they had to swap back. St. Mary's in present day. I'm not sure when they remodeled it or went from this church to this church, if it's the same church. I didn't dig it. But the ladies from Gilesville just asked them, they'll know. St. Bartholomew and Trempealeau, another one. I says, small community, not a lot of parishioners in there. They've got two Catholic cemeteries, the old cemetery out on 11th Street. Most of the members have been exhumed and put into the new cemetery. But James Reed settled it in the 1840s. And St. Mary's, like I said, the priest came up from La Crosse, and he did twice a year, whether they needed it or not. They'd come up and they'd have Mass in there. Otherwise, it was in somebody's home, and Anthony Grignon there was a stepson or son-in-law, don't quote me on that, of James Reed. He's a left-hand relation. But anyhow, they built their church there. This was the first church that they constructed in there. It almost looks like there is a father would be here, there's some children playing here. I'm not sure when this picture was taken. I got this, I believe, from Keith over at Cook, over at Old Main. And the present church got built up here for $125,000 here. The old church stood where the parking lot is nowadays. They took that down and cleared that all away and built this present church they have there. Blair, the same thing. I said, new church built here in the community. I said, there's not a lot of history. There ain't a lot to say about them. It was a mission of Ettrick and dedicated in 64, I believe. It cost them $45,000 at that time, and that still was a fortune back when we were kids. Still the fortune. Let's keep it that way. And St. John's up in Whitehall, the priest from Northcliff, Father Rosk, he helped establish the church up in Whitehall. I said that people always had to drive to Independence or drove to wherever, to get going. The Henry Ketchum up here, it states on there that he had most of the land in Whitehall. Henry Ketchum also owned Petrick's Park. The original Whitehall was up by Coral City. It wasn't downtown. When the railroad moved, it's kind of like here. We moved from the top of the hill down here. Whitehall moved down a little ways because of the railroad. But Ketchum owned a lot of land in this area, and I said he was kind of a get-all character, I guess you would say. Now, here we got to kind of really keep moving because we're going to be here forever. I know we have two ladies sleeping in the back already. There's a lot of other churches in here. This is in French Creek. You get out by French Creek Lutheran Church, make a right. There's a little Pioneer Cemetery in the region that says Our Savior. And it's a list of early settlers here. And it tells you how many people, one German, one Swedish church, evangelistic, so many Presbyterian, Methodist. Like I said, I got a wave in the thing. I can't see all the thing over here. The first church says, for the Lutherans, started in Jackson County, 1857. And they came over, because it was just over up by Taylor. So then they moved into Blair, and once you got in there, then see, they built a church, and then it split off, and then another church split off, and here they must have reunited, and here's another church where it split and split. So I said they were doing the same thing. These churches were built, and then they were constructed, remodeled. Some were repurposed, some were taken down. Many of them were burnt by fire. The communities, we got better transportation, so they merged, and the churches got thicker. Here, this is I can't place the church. I got the picture, and I must have lost the information, and I think it's been remodeled. I'm not sure which church it is. Okay, Blair ended up, it had 5 mission churches at one time. And it was originally mostly Norwegian people there. I said they do have a Catholic church in there now and a few other churches. But I said the Lutheran church was started in 1877, and it's still going good there. A small cemetery right behind the church now. Upper Beaver Creek was the first church outside of Blair, and they started spreading out. Didn't take long. This congregation had a little friction with another congregation, and they split, similar to North Creek and St. Stan's here. And so North Beaver Creek kept going, and South Beaver Creek established their own church in 1859 and still runs there today. The Hardy Creek was another Norwegian church. This land is a Rindle's farm. And I think it was some relation to Terry Rindle, our dentist here in Arcadia, original land is standing on. French brick here, another, I said, nice little church just over the hill, not far away, big cemetery, and a lot of Norwegian people over in Ettrick area there. Another one here, the United Evangelist Church in Gilsville, established in 1886. And the Tamarack Church here, here's a picture of the original church built in Tamarack. They were going to build it down by the cemetery, which would be, I guess, by Roy's store where the tavern stands now. But the year that they were going to construct it, the chinch bug was so bad it destroyed the crops, and the farmers didn't have the money. And then when they did have the money, they said so many Polish people moved in, they decided to build a new church up in Norway Valley away from the Polacks. So when that church got remodeled, they took the old one down and they built the present church. It doesn't look like they're saving that steeple in that picture, I said, but the old church was taken down. The new one was rebuilt in 1927, still stands today. I said, I think it's serviced by the minister out of Calvary out of Trempealeau. And St. John's at Glencoe. There were two churches here. St. John's was like St. Peter and Paul. They were really popular names. This church was up by the Glencoe Cemetery. And St. Joe's was just across the next cemetery, just slightly away. Then it moved to Arcadia, and it was built up here by the broiler plant, where the road has been remodeled now. And St. John's was up there. After a while, St. John's united with St. John's Christ Lutheran, which started up on Montana Ridge, not up by Tyson Ridge, up where St. Peter and Paul was, the mission of Wamedy. But St. John's Christ was a little bit farther down. There's still a cemetery up there on top of that hill. They moved then here to Arcadia and got the present church that's down here now, the Lutheran church across the river. Arcadia also had a Methodist church in 1857. That's questionable on the date there. There was a Baptist church in 1850. There was a People's church. And there was a Unitarian church, but I don't know the date, didn't get a picture of any of those churches. The Fogness over here by Blair, organized in 1866. Most of the services, like all the other churches, started in the homes. I said the people would come and you could see the size of the family. Like I mentioned the father earlier, I said, you look at these families here. Yes, but each person had maybe 2 or 3 kids and you only had 40 acres. So look at the families you had. Now you got one guy's got 500, 1,000 acres. Well, yeah, there's only 4 or 5 people. So you can see why the attendance in church suffers a lot too, because I said they don't have the population that we used to have. Well, the first church got too small, so they built a second church. And they no more than got driving the nails in it, and it burnt to the ground in 1901, so they had to rebuild. And they were laughing because they said they had to get the church done before winter, and they had it fairly well constructed, but it wasn't nowhere near sealed. And they said you could always tell the temperature by judging how many coats the minister had to wear at the sermon, because the more coats he had on, they said the colder it was outside, you had to dress for the church a little harder. And like I said, they're still going today. Nancy Bergman, I said, isn't here. Usually she does the filming here for Whitehall. But I said, she said, they're like a lot of the other churches, their congregation is getting smaller and smaller. She said, it's getting a struggle to keep the churches going. Living Hope in Ettrick, here's another church I said, don't know a lot of history about it, started in 1897. Must have some attendance, some people still going there. There was a Presbyterian church over in Ettrick at one time. Gilsville Lutheran churches, they were in 1905. Now the Zion Lutheran Church stands here today. And there was a Presbyterian church, and there was a Presbyterian congregation there, and there's a whole list of things there that's almost impossible for me to read from this angle here, but whatever. There were so many Lutheran churches. Like I said, I was just amazed. I said the amount of churches that were built in this community. A lot of them are gone. I said they've been converted into homes and whatever else. The Methodist church over there, I knew Laverne and Bonnie Olson, maybe a number of you did. Laverne used to sell TVs. He'd come right to your house. He sold Zenith TVs out of Galesville. I remember I went to Laverne's one time and there was a special on CBS or something, and it was a Sunday and our TV went on a fritz, and I told Laverne I want to watch that show at 6 o'clock, and I had a TV by 6 o'clock. I mean, he was a one heck of a mechanic and TV guy, so he's buried out in Bryce's Prairie out there in that little cemetery. But they said his house was built out of this church, and the windows, it was rumored, might have been up in the attic of that thing. There was also a Swedish church over in Galesville, and built in 1881. And there was another church built in 1909, and they remodeled. This one I didn't know about either. I worked in the park for a number of years, did maintenance there, and where the red X is on over here, this is Sullivan's Supper Club. And then the park entrance would be about here. Here's a sign that says Welcome Pearl Park. Just around that corner here, there's kind of a square. This is a LiDAR image. LiDAR removes the trees and shows you the topography of the ground. And this square here was a building, and it was this church. And it was the first Lutheran church in Trempealeau, which I didn't know. And the guy's son went on to become governor of the Dakotas out there. So kind of a interesting little thing. It was taken down in the 70s, I guess, so it had to be there when we were kids, when we used to go and play in the park there for school picnics. But Mount Calvary dedicated in 1860 or 1960 here. And like I said, the minister here I know does take care of Tamarack. They flip back and forth. Centerville had a Methodist church. That church got removed when they widened the highway. There was no highway from Centerville to Winona. People had to always go Whistle Pass, and you had to go through Dodge. Even the stagecoach road went from La Crosse, it went up, you went to Dodge. And from Dodge, you went to Arcadia, you went to Elma. It spurred off. But when they widened the highway, Centerville Church was moved, and the cemetery was moved. The people in the Methodist cemetery were taken, they were put in Evergreen Cemetery out there by Universal Truck. They put the people in there. And there was some history written here by Evelyn Dutton. She had a little bit of history of that, and she said she remembers during the Civil War years, she said she only had that one dress, and her mom said she could wear it like to church, but then the next day she had to have it washed so she could wear it to school, you know. And she said we had to pay 65 cents a yard for that material. She just thought it was an outrageous price, you know. The Methodist Church in Trempealeau is still in there. When they took the church down in Centerville, they took some of the windows and some of the equipment from there, ended up in this church here being in Trempealeau, which is still going. Then we go a little bit north here. This is up toward Elk Creek, and up that direction over here we have the Bennett Valley Church, 1875, well-maintained little church in the country here. Bruce Valley too, 1872, well-maintained church. I don't believe Bruce Valley is used now for like regular per se services, but they have Memorial Day and Veterans Day are always at that church. There's two Chimney Rocks. This is the Chimney Rock, or Elk Creek, I should say, not Chimney Rock. This is a Chimney Rock Church, and then the Elk Creek Church. There's an Elk Creek up by Mondovi also. We all know the Elk Creek just here north of Independence. Whitehall congregations here and Pigeon Falls, they both started 1869 when they built these churches. They all are similar in style, but you can see there's a little bit difference maybe in the spires on the towers when they built these things. This is the Whitehall picture, the same church that was on this one. This is the Pigeon Falls Church. I believe it was on the road. You go make a right in Pigeon Falls. There's only 5 houses in Pigeon Falls, so it isn't hard to figure out where the church used to be. Independence Lutheran Church was organized in 1879. The Whitehall Methodist Church established in 1875. There were approximately 7 Methodist churches in Trempealeau County. I said the Methodist and Independence now, I don't think I got a current picture of it, no. They have a well-maintained church. Somebody's repainted it. I believe maybe the Spanish people may be using it for a church right now. But I said it's been repainted and really well taken care of. It's really a nice looking church. Here was another group of people that I was kind of surprised to find out. The there was some controversy one time. Is it Traverse Valley or Travis Valley? According to this, I think this was in northern Wisconsin history, when the Mormons settled here in 1855, the head Mormon was a Dr. Travis. And so it could be first guy in Travis Valley. But also in another book said there was a Joshua Travis here, and he was here before 1860, and he settled in Travis Valley. So if you say it's Travis Valley or Traverse Valley, you can't be wrong, because there's a book to back you up on either one here. But the Mormons decided that they could not stay in this area. I don't know if it was conflict of religion or whatever reason, but they burnt their buildings and stuff, and they left. They briefly had a little bit of an establishment down in the Caledonia area where the ferry was that we talked about a little bit earlier, but they didn't stay there long, and they went farther. Arcadia had an Episcopalian church here, a Methodist church. It still is across the river. Then we go into Buffalo County, and like I said, this is going to get long because there's people going to be leaving pretty quick. Buffalo County, 1888, I says, there were a picture here. This is the Elk Creek Church. This would be up toward Mondovi. This is a Norwegian Evangelist Lutheran congregation. There was one in Buffalo City, Fountain City, Nelson, Mondovi, Naples, Wamedy, and even in Glencoe. But I'm not sure where that was in Glencoe. I couldn't find that church. This is the church of the Modena, built in 18-something there. I can't see because of the squiggles, but $2,500 when they built that, so probably, $50,000 in no time. Cochrane in Fountain City, Christ Lutheran there, established in 1902. Nice new church there. Across the road, a little ways down the road there is the Hope United Church. That church is a combination of some people that were in Buffalo City, and they united with this here church and established this one here in Cochrane. You got St. Michael's over here and St. John's in Fountain City. I said both well-changed and well-maintained churches. I said good supporting congregation, both of those. Elma has St. John's too. St. John Luke, a Methodist church established over there. And I don't believe I have the years for either one of these churches here. Then you had the Reformed churches, and this is the St. Paul Reformed Church. This is in Elma. It was established 1859. Then we had a Congregational church, and one up on Beef River in 1885. And see, this Congregational church, now we just did a video on Wamedy for WTCO TV, and I think this church is at, I believe that's Wychik Valley. It's spelled like Wychik with a J. But it was right at the mouth of that valley, and they had a little tussle with the minister, and the minister left on them, and then a new minister came, and he could not get the church reestablished, and it failed. And then Eagle Valley Church, a nice little well-maintained church out there, a small cemetery right across from it, established in 1905. And we get over here to the oldest church or congregation, let's say, in Buffalo County. And they come up there and they try to tell you, well, he was the first founder, The guys in this name, they say he was a Kinchy. Another one says it was a Mueller, another one says it was a Henry. But whoever it was, this is the oldest church in Buffalo County. Probably established around 1853-54. It was really, really soon after Buffalo County was declared. There were other evangelistic churches. There was one in Elma, Belvedere, Wamedy, Lincoln, Fountain City, up in Deer Creek. Then there was a Methodist church, a Baptist church, whatever else it says there on the bottom. This church burnt down. It was rebuilt in 1916. The Sente boys here, I said they refurbished the bell, they re-maintained it. And like most of these churches, they're still held together by their congregation and a few people that are left. We talked to a lady up there, and they said this church is down to maybe about 15 families already. They said it's really getting to be a small congregation left. And with that, all these communities that we've talked about, churches, are all held together they're tied together by these doggone knots that we're going to be living with. So, and I'm not taking questions. And with that, I thank you for your time, ladies, I says, and hope you enjoy your day here.